Good day and welcome to FDM, the channel dedicated to Ferra data models. Well, tomorrow the US GDP for the first quarter will be released. Previously in 2019 quarter 4 it was 2.1%. Of course the forecast for is now much lower. The consensus forecast for the value at the moment is 4% negative 4%, and I want to use FDM to look at this value just to see if that is attainable, if it's maybe low, optimistic, and also want to see if we do get such a negative figure for the US, what that might imply for South Africa. Okay, so the real aim of this, of course, is to demonstrate FDM capabilities, but these are relevant values and make it a bit interesting. So let's go to FDM. Now I've already got a project running here. Let me just go back to the beginning. So I've already created this project and entered the code. But I started out by downloading the GDP from Ferra for the US, and also downloading the GDP from Stats SA for South Africa. And now let's look at these values. So I entered all this code and executed it. However, it's a little bit small here, so I copied and pasted it into an editor. And let me just go through this to show you what's happening. So I'm just loading into the calculation. I'm loading those two series that I downloaded and giving them local names. So SA GDP and US GDP will be the two GDP figures in levels. Then here I calculate the percentage change annualized. So that PA means the quarter-on-quarter change annualized. Multiplied by 100 so that the figures will be a bit more familiar. And now I want to look at the last figure, because I'm going to calculate changes from that last figure. So let's look at the last figure for South Africa and for the US, and those two calculations will give me that. It will basically index that time series. You can think of it as an array almost, with those square brackets, and give me back the observation for the date, the last date in that series. So that just gives me the last value of the percentage changes in each of those series. And now I want to look at changes in this annualized percentage change. So I'm here the second derivative if you want, but that basically calculates the change. That calculates the change in the South African annualized percentage change, and the same for the US. Okay, so now I can see if the projected value is relatively large or not. Now, how do I do that? I want to compare that to the typical value. So I'm going to standardize these changes. In order to standardize them, I need the mean and the standard deviation. So I calculate the mean and the standard deviation for South Africa, and the mean and the standard deviation for the US. Okay. Now, the output, I'm going to create a matrix to contain the output, and this matrix will have 11 columns. So I'm going to look at what happens if the forecast for US GDP is, let's say, 0%, -1%, -2%, and so on, up to -10%. So that matrix needs 11 rows to contain 0 to 10, and then 3 columns. The first column here will be the standardized value. Then I will have the US forecast being 0, -1, -2, and so on. And next I will see that US forecast. What does that imply for South Africa? So I will standardize the US forecast, and then I will convert, if you want, that standard value into a South African forecast, and then see what that implies. Okay, so I need a loop. I'm going to loop from 0 to -10 for the US forecast. And then for each of those forecasts, I'm going to calculate what is that change. Of course, if the forecast is, let's say, 0% or then the change will be that 0% less the last value that I calculated before. So that gives me the change in US GDP, in US GDP's annualized percentage change, and then I standardize that. So this USZ now contains the standardized equivalent of that change. Now I want to see if I said that, if I use the same standardized change, what happens in South Africa. So for now I'm just going to use exactly the same value as the US, and then I just need to solve in this equation. If I solve for the change, it looks like this. It's the standardized value times the standard deviation plus the mean. And then if I've got that change, I can apply it to the last value to get the forecast for South Africa. Okay, here I'm just solving the forecast from that equation. So to solve for the forecast, I need to take the change and add it to the last value. There I take the change and add it to the last value. Okay, then at this point the row in the matrix is equal to that equation. Because that one counts negatively, I need to subtract it to get the row, to put it into the matrix, and then in the first row I'll put the standardized value, the second row the US forecast, and in the third row the South African forecast. Okay, and then I just go to the next forecast, 0, -1, -2, and so on. When done, I print that matrix out because I'm really interested in those values. And here, just to test some correlations, or to test this relationship, is there a relationship between these standardized values between the US and South Africa? So here I look at the standardized South African values as a function of a constant, and the standardized US values, lag 1 and lag 2, just to test some lags as well. And then let's look at the standardized South African values as a function of a constant, the standardized US values, and the lagged standardized South African values. So just to get the statistics up a bit and maybe fit some of the noise that I will be, or some of the explanatory power that these equations will not contain. Let's just add some vanilla lag in there to sort of capture this, the mechanics at work here, and then let's see if this can add to those mechanics. Then I also want to eyeball things, and I'm going to print or to make a report, and in that report I'm going to plot the US and the South African GDP annualized percentage changes. Okay, so as you develop these little codes in FTM, or programs or calculations as they're called, it helps to have the manual on hand. So I typically open up the manual in a browser, and I go to functions, or I open up the FTM website and I go to functions, and then here I can browse all the functions and things are indexed, and I can, for example, go to the data series functions and see that there's an average function, and I can get some information on how it works. Or in this case I was looking at the report function. If I want to add a report, it's the report add function, and that function takes the following arguments: name, description, summary, and then some kind of a template. So I used this as a reference, and that allowed me to enter this line. So there we've got the name of the report, a description, a summary, and the type, just a plain report. And there's the two series I'm interested in. Okay, so in FTM, let's go back there. I can run this, and then I can look at the output. Again, it's maybe a little bit small, so let me copy this out, as I already did, and paste it into my editor, where I can zoom in quite a bit. So here we look at that matrix. This is now the matrix we calculated, and then in the first column you see the Z values. Now the consensus forecast for the first quarter is negative 4%. Right? Negative 4%, if I standardize that, is negative 1.4. A z of negative. Now that's not an extremely an outlier by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, you have to go here to around 2 to get maybe a tail value and even above 2. So the 4% is in a way, if I standardize it, it's fairly tame, which I suppose is fine for the first quarter, because the first quarter only saw part of the virus's impact. Now, that standardized value of negative 1.4, if I translate that into a South African GDP forecast, I get a negative 5%. Okay. Now, if I go to, let's say, around a 2 standardized value, then my forecast for the US is around negative 6.5. All right. So things get quite a bit worse if I stretch the Z value. Okay, let's look at the models. So this is the output you get from a OLS model. So if I fit the standardized value of South African change in the annualized GDP to a constant and the US equivalent, I'm just going to look at the F values. The probability is 8%, the F value is 3, so this model doesn't work. Let's look at the next one. So here I'm looking at a lag. I'm looking at the lagged US standardized value, and the probability is 40%. So this one's even worse. If I go to another lag, lag 2 quarters, the F value is even worse. So this doesn't work. All right. Okay, so let's try and improve that model by adding a lagged value of this variable. Well, let's add this variable lag just to sort of have a bit more explanatory power. And immediately you can see, look at that F value. Now we've got a hugely significant model here, and the F value is much higher, 8.3 in this case. Okay, let's lag US GDP a bit more. So if I lag US GDP a bit more, then now the 8.3 becomes 8.5, and I've still got a hugely significant model. Let's go to another lag. Let's lag US GDP by 2. Then, okay, then it's still hugely significant, but the F value is not as good. So this is the best model, and it looks like this. US, the change in the annualized percentage change GDP standardized is a function of a constant, the same for the US and the same for South Africa, lagged by 1. And the US is also lagged by 1. So this is actually a nice model to forecast, because I can use the previous values. Yeah, and let's look at the coefficients. So there you see the coefficients. The constant, I can just as well throw that away. That's not working. But the US GDP is a 0.2 impact. So a standard value change here of 1 in the US will add 0.2. If it goes down by negative 1.5, this will subtract about 3 from about 0.3 from South African GDP. And the South African GDP itself comes in most significantly, but actually with a negative value. So there must be some oscillation in there. And we just had a negative GDP, so this is probably going to outweigh that one. But there's the model, and I could test that model as well. But let's go back to FTM and let's just eyeball it a bit. The report that was created. So there's the report. You can see it's newly created. I haven't opened it yet. There's the negative 2.1. fourth quarter figure for the US and South Africa. The last two quarters were negative. There you can see that. And here you can see the percentage changes. And you can see that a negative 4 is really not big, if you want. If I standardize that, it's not a big value. We've had several values in the past couple of years that were larger than that on the negative side, that were more negative than that. So if I want to go to a standardized value of negative 2, as we saw here, I would need to go to about a minus 6.5, more or less. A minus 6.5 would put me around here. And you can see even that has happened in the past. Minus 6.5 is not unimaginable. It happened as recently as the financial crisis. So things can get much worse than the negative 4%. That's the consensus forecast. And I think that's fine for the first quarter, but I think for the second quarter and further on, we might see some of these really big values. The negative 4% is still pretty tiny. Well, that's it. Thank you.